This is the tutorial for Chapter 4, Section 3, Similar Figures, Part 2. So the item that we're going to be looking at is using the angle-angle similarity postulate to describe whether triangles are congruent or not. And so basically all this says is if we have two angles is all we end up needing, and if we can see that two triangles have the same set of angles, just two of them, then we know that they are similar. And what we're looking at, the reason why we only need two is because if you take the sum of all the angles in a triangle, it's 180. And so if we know two of them, then that third one would have to be the same as well, because you always subtract that sum from 180 to find the third one. So looking at this one, doesn't look like they are to start with, but what we can do is we can find one of the missing angles. So it doesn't matter which one we try here, and I'll just go ahead and look at this one to start with. So my formula is this: if I take 180 and I subtract the sum of these two angles that I'm given, I should get the missing angle. So I'm going to take the 30 degrees and add it to the 41 degrees, and that gives me 71 degrees. I go ahead and subtract the 180 from that, and that leaves me with 109 degrees. So from there, the reason I said you only need to do one of them is because now we should be able to see at least two of the angles we have. So take a look at this. We have 109 and 30. And this also has 109 and 30. So I don't need to find this angle. I know this angle is 41 degrees because I know 109 and 30 will add to make 41, because when I added the 41 and 30, subtracted that from 180, I got the 109. So what I can say is the triangles, let's say, the triangles are similar because the two angles are, because we'll just say two angles instead of the two angles, just say two angles are congruent. And so let's take a look at the next one here, and same sort of thing. And so we're going to take two of the angles that we already have. So I'm looking at this 92, and I'm looking at the 61. I'm going to add those two together. So I'm going to go 180, and I'm going to take that sum away from 180. So I'm going to take the two and add them together. 61 plus 92. Take that sum, and when I add those two numbers together, I get 153. I'm going to take away 180, that 153 from 180, and that'll leave me with 27 degrees. So I know this angle here is 27 degrees. Now what I'm looking for is, do I have an angle that, or two angles that share the same angles I have here? And I sure enough do. See, this is 27 and 92, and right here I have 27 and 92. Since we have two sets of angles that are the same in each of the two triangles, then I can say that the two triangles are similar. And so I have the same phrase I'm going to end up using here. So I'll just go ahead and copy this phrase to the other side, and that would be my explanation. And there it is. So on the next one, they're giving us that these two angles are similar to start with. And so what we can end up doing here is we're supposed to find each angle listed below, and we're supposed to give some reasoning. So when we're looking at angles, you have to look at corresponding parts, or corresponding angles. And I'm going to look at corresponding points to start with to figure out which angles correspond. So I can't just look at A and say, oh, it looks like it's F, or it looks like it corresponds to E or D. I know these are similar, so A is going to have the same angle as one of these, but I just need to figure out which one it is. So the way you figure it out is you look at how they wrote the triangle, and if they did it properly, they should end up having the corresponding points in the same location of how they phrased the triangle. So you see how A is first? Well, then A corresponds to D. So these two are corresponding points. So A and D are the same. And so I could do that with the C here as well. So C corresponds to F because they're in the same location. So C right here is 40 degrees. I know that F is also going to end up being 40 degrees. B is the same, is in the center, so it between the A and the C. Well, it corresponds to E. So E and B correspond. So they are both going to end up being 45 degrees. So I can find this last one if I wanted to by doing that subtraction rule like we had done before. We can take the sum of the two angles I'm given and subtract that from 180 degrees. So now I have 180 minus 85, and when I go ahead and do the subtraction, I'll be left with 95 degrees. So I know A is 95, and since A is 95 and they're similar, then D would also have to be 95 degrees. So now they say find each angle listed below and give the reasoning. So when they're naming angles from points, what they end up doing is they start with a point here, B, and then they go to A, and then they go to C. That's what it says, BA to C. So A is the angle that they're talking about, or point A. At point A, that will be the angle. So BAC represents the angle we're looking for. That is equal to 90 degrees. It's congruent, or it equals 90 degrees, or 95 degrees. Now, we want to specify which one is it congruent to over here. And it's congruent to, now, if I look at, and they say BAC, if I do the same order here. So notice I was in the B, so I got to look at what corresponds to B. Well, E does. So I know I have to do E next. And then it goes A. Well, the one that corresponds to A is D. So I put D next. And then the last one is F. It has to be F, and F should correspond to C, and it does. So see how it went BA to C? Well, here it goes ED to F. And so those are the corresponding, or those are congruent angles, and the reasoning would be this. So this is our phrase that we're going to use, and we're going to use it every time if they're asking this question. We'll say because corresponding angles of similar triangles are congruent. So the angle BAC, this angle right here, is congruent to angle EDF, and the reason is because corresponding angles, so those are corresponding angles, of similar triangles are congruent. That's a rule with similar triangles. The angles are always going to end up being congruent. So let's take a look at the next one, and they mention DEF. So DEF, so I'm going to this one here, DE to F, so that's just in order. And DEF would be the same as angle ABC. So notice how E is in the center. That's the one they're looking for. That's this one right here. And B is going to be in the center as well. So that's the one we're looking for. Those two, of course, those two are congruent. So I know it equals 45 degrees. And the reasoning would be the same reasoning I have here. So I'm just going to copy this reasoning and just stick it right here. That would be my reasoning. So let's take a look at the next one. And it says FDE. So FDE. And so we look at that. Notice how they start with F, then they went to D, and then E. So what corresponds to F? Well, it's C. So it's going to be congruent to angle C. Now what corresponds to D? Well, it would be A. So CA and then B. And notice that's the same as FDE, same order. So FDE, CAB, so same exact thing. And the reasoning behind this is the same as we had before, because corresponding angles of similar triangles are congruent. And let's take a look at the last one of this type. It says DFE. So DF to E. So the one that corresponds to D would end up being A, because that's in the same location. The one that corresponds to F is C. 1 corresponds to E is B. And let's see what that angle was. I didn't say what the angle of this one was, so I'll get that one in just a moment. So ACB, AC to B, it's 40 degrees. And this one over here, CAB, CAB was 95 degrees. Well, again, the reasoning behind this is always the same. So let's go ahead and copy that reasoning down, because corresponding angles of similar triangles are congruent. Well, I've got a couple other problems, and check out the next tutorial for those.